My name is Adam Long. I'm an EDS instructional technology candidate. I teach economics at Sonoraville High School, and for my capstone proposal, my capstone project, I tackled the topic of using technology to boost standardized test scores. In my implementation of the capstone assignment, I worked at North Murray High School, and at North Murray we struggled with low test scores on the milestone for economics, and that was largely due, in my opinion, to the lack of instructional technology, and because we lack instructional technology, we're unable to engage and motivate. So naturally, the research question for my project became, how will instructional technology in conjunction with 21st century learning strategies impact student achievement data of high school students? So really quickly, taking a look at the student demographics that I used in my study, I had two periods. I had a second period and a sixth period. In total, I had 42 students. Second period had 11 males and 7 females. Of those 18 students, 6 were inclusion students. My sixth period class, I had 11 males and 13 females. Of these 24 students, 6 were inclusion, and of the 42 total students, we had 12 in our class that were inclusion students. The capstone project plan was designed to measure the effectiveness of technology with 2 general education inclusion classes. Using authentic learning strategies that are supported with technology was something that was very important to me. I had learned about it through our instructional technology program, and it became a great way to enhance engagement and motivation. And within authentic learning, there is absolutely a place for a variety of instructional technology tools. Now, as we planned, or as we were going to plan the project, everything was going to be based on data from student surveys that the students would take to really kind of describe themselves, their learning environment, their feelings on technology, and their confidence of the teacher. The plan was to provide a personalized learning environment for the macroeconomics unit, and to use quizzes to remediate and review the content and check for learning gaps. By the end of the unit and the project, students should be able to understand, define, explain, and apply the concepts of macroeconomics. Now, the survey questions that were used in gathering information from the students specifically. The first question: is technology important for student learning? This is a very important question to determine their attitudes towards technology to begin with, and how open they are to learning and using new technology. Second question: should learning always be fun? I'm really curious about the environment in which my students are going to learn the best. Number 3, does the teacher seem knowledgeable about economics? This is really a question about the student-teacher relationship and their confidence in me as their teacher to teach them the correct information. And then lastly, do you feel like you know much about macroeconomics? This was an important question because we had to establish where are they now before we ever start anything, and do they and do I have an accurate picture of where they currently are before we do anything. The information was very interesting. 24% of my students claim that technology is very important for learning. 52% said it was somewhat important for learning, and 34% said it was not important for learning. 58% reported that learning should be fun. 32% reported it should sometimes be fun, and 10% reported it should never be fun. 85% of my students believed that the teacher knew the content well. 15% believed that the teacher knew some of the material well, and none of the students believed that the teacher knew none of the material. The most interesting, perhaps, was that 12 of the students going into the macroeconomics unit or the Capstone project believed that they knew macroeconomics pretty well. 8% believed they only knew it somewhat, and 80% believed they knew very little about macroeconomics. As far as the Capstone experience itself, most of the work was front-loaded, and there was a lot of work to be done up front. However, as the work was completed up front, it really sets the stage for the future, because when I'm actually carrying out the plan and I'm beginning to actually teach and instruct and work with the students, I have a great deal of freedom because the planning has already been done. It's just up to the execution at that point. The technology ranged from instructional videos to simulations, and it included the construction of a podcast. This is something I kind of added as we were working through the unit, and it ended up fitting in. However, there were different ideas I have moving forward. The entire project was supposed to provide personalized learning opportunities and allow me the freedom and flexibility to manage the environment, to facilitate growth based on individual needs, and to support student learning with technology. I'm not supposed to stand up at the classroom in this project and lead all of their learning with a leash. Instead, I'm trying to allow them to have control of their learning, and me just encourage them to step further and further and further and work with technology and dive deeper into the content, to ask questions, and to really take ownership for their learning. We use drill and practice software to identify learning gaps and provide remediation based on data. This was very effective. However, I overdid this, and it ended up kind of backfiring in some instances, because my students began to look for keywords, and they, instead of understanding the questions and identifying the correct terms, they really just kind of sped through a lot of the work. And so my approach would be, moving forward, to use drill and practice software more strategically throughout the unit, and then take that information and teach off of it. Take that data and teach off of it. Instruction in the Capstone took place for 5 weeks and included 2 summative assessments. I already talked about the podcast, and then at the end of the unit, once we had completed all the instruction, the activities, and the assessments, or the podcast assessment, we went back and we had a unit exam. Now, getting into the unit exam results, there were 2 class periods that took this. As I stated earlier, my inclusion students in second period averaged a 60. My general ed students averaged a 67. So there's a 7-point gap there that needs to get closed with regard to general education. And with regard to the inclusion students, together they averaged a 65. There were 18 general ed students and 6 inclusion students in that second period. In the 6th period class, our inclusion students averaged a 65, and the general education students averaged a 75. So there's an even wider gap here. The total average was a 71. With the inclusion group, my students averaged a 62.5. and the general ed averaged a 70. The total average ended up being a 68. The goals of the capstone were to create 75% of the content through instructional videos. This goal was achieved and provided great flexibility for me to be able to really facilitate and engage my students throughout the instructional process. The second goal was an 80% pass rate at the proficient level or above. So basically on the unit exam, I wanted 80% of my students to score an 80 or higher on the unit exam. Instead, we had something like 75% pass from 70 and above and only 50% pass from 80 and above. The next objective was 80% pass on the milestone. However, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, this objective was unable to be reached. Finally, the last goal was to submit findings that would make a case in favor of instructional technology to my peers, and really encourage them to use instructional technology more effectively in the future. And this was done remotely or virtually because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In reflection, I learned a lot of great things. I do believe that technology is effective at enhancing student engagement and motivation. However, teachers must be strategic in how they're using technology, and it needs to be like real uses that they can have in the future. Technology requires intense structure and front-loaded planning. However, the back end of the majority of the work that they do is typically going to be easier and is going to allow teachers really to engage with their students and really connect the dots that technology can't quite do. The third point is perhaps the most important thing that I learned through this entire capstone experience. Technology alone will not solve all of our instructional problems. Technology cannot replace the teachers and the relationships that teachers have with their students. However, technology can be an incredible tool if leveraged properly. Another important point: one size does not fit all students or teachers. And this is important because not every student's going to walk away from using a technology and have all the answers. And the same for a teacher. What works in one classroom may not work in another. And so it's important for teachers to give students choices, but also for leadership to give teachers choices in the technology that they're integrating into their classroom. And lastly, teachers must be vigilant in incorporating the latest technologies and the latest technology into their instruction. We're in an era and in a time where new technology seems like it's coming out every single day. So very frequently, really probably from year to year or every couple of years, there are brand new tools that were not available a few years back that teachers can leverage to enhance the learning experience for their students and really to close all types of learning gaps. And as teachers, we must investigate and integrate these new emerging technologies into our practice. This is my capstone. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. And these are the sources cited for the capstone project.